Hello and welcome to another edition of Endgames for Beginners, where I go over all the basic endgame principles that you should know as a beginner playing the game of chess to help you win more games. In this video, we're going to be going over the rule of T, which is a very simple premise that you should know when playing your king pawn endgames, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So without further ado, let's begin. So in our first example here, we have our two kings here with a pawn in front of our white king. So the way that the rule of T works to start off with is the rule of T, you have to make a T from where your pawn is. So you have your pawn here, make a nice little T here. So our job is these three squares. So you create a T and then you pick up these three squares. And your job is to get your king to one of these three squares before the black king can. So in this position here, we'll see how white does it. King comes over here to F2, black king comes over to F7, trying to keep opposition. White comes here on E7, black keeps the opposition here on E7 as well, but black gets here on the T in front of this pawn. From this point, they are definitely winning because no matter what, if black goes into opposition here, you can outflank the king because the black king has opposition here, but white has the nice little waiting move of E3. And that now puts the white king in opposition. And you're able to easily move the king up the board and move the pawn up to promotion. So there's no way for black to stop this. White easily wins this endgame, and that's the rule of T in a nutshell. In this situation though, it is not going to be a win. It's actually going to be a draw from this position because white has no way of getting to this T before the black king can. So in this position, white's trying to race up to get in that position, but black keeps this opposition now, and there is no way for white to break through. He can't get to any of these three squares, and because white can't execute the rule of T, it's going to be a draw. So now we have other rooks on the board here. White is to move. Is it advantageous for white to take the rook? Well, let's see. It is very important in endgames to make sure that you are taking your time, counting out the steps, especially if you have that time, make sure you take it. So in this example, we look up this move here. He takes, the king takes here. We have to get our king on these two moves, and black is very close to getting to one of these three squares. We can't go here because if you do that, the king comes here, we come here, king is already there, and it's going to prevent us from moving. But what if instead we take here, the king comes here, and then we move here, king moves there, we move there, king moves here, we move here. If white moves here, we can get our opposition and we can move. So in this situation, white takes, we go there, and then we can move here and get our king in opposition, able to get it then onto one of the three squares, complete the T. White's going to easily be able to promote as we move the pieces up. There's no way for black to stop it. So that is a very good example of the rule of T and how it would apply in an actual game that you play, and something that you would see in a game of yours. So we're looking in this position here. Let's say black takes this rook here. Is it better to take with your king or with the pawn? Now, a lot of people would say now that we've been going over the rule of T, the best thing to do would be to take with the king. Well, if you do that, it's automatically a draw because the king can come here, and there's no way for you to get your pawn in there because the rook pawn doesn't even create a T. In this position, when the rook's here, there is no T. It's a half a T. So the rule of T doesn't apply for rook pawns here. What you need to do instead is you need to take here on A5 with the pawn, and you got to make sure that you get your king in front of this pawn. So from here, the king moves to D7. We move our king here to A5. They move up, we move up, and we got opposition. Now, it's very important in this position that now that you have opposition, you don't finagle this to a stalemate. The way you would finagle this to a stalemate is you go queen to C6, king comes up here, and let's say you move here. King moves, and then you have a stalemate. So the only way to get out of that, if you push it up to B6, it's a stalemate, but the only way to get back out of that is you come here, king comes here, and then you work your way into this here, and there is no way to stop this. They're going to be creating queen, you're going to win. So the rule of T doesn't apply to rook pawns, but if you were able to get a knight pawn, make sure that you don't fall for that stalemate pattern and draw yourself a game that you're easily winning. So in our last example here, we have two queens on the board, two kings and a pawn. White has the advantage. Is trading the queens advantageous for white here? If we trade here, you have this king very close to the pawn. The king is pretty far away. Is there a way for white to clutch this out and get the victory? In this example, white exchanging the queens would win. The reason being, after exchanging, you go king to F5. The king has nowhere to go but here to E8, and then you can move over here to E6. And then there's another little trick here about promoting your king. Once the king moves over here to D8, you're able to push this pawn up, and because there's no check, the king has to move over to the side here. You push your king up and promote the pawn. We'll show you how that works. After the queen takes here, the king goes. King pushes up. King can't come here because the pawn is covering it. So what the king has to do from here is they have to go over here to E8. And so from here, you have to push your king up to E6, support that pawn. The king has to go to D8 or the pawn is definitely going to pass. So king moves here, and you're able to move this pawn up without stalemate because this is the only square that the black king has to go through. They're in Zugzwang. So after the king goes here, you just move the king up, and you're easily going to be promoting this pawn and winning the game. So that's it for the rule T. It's a very simple concept that any beginner should know when playing their endgames. And by knowing it, you're definitely going to have a better chance of converting a lot of these king pawn endgames that would otherwise become a draw. So if you like that video, please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can also follow me at Twitch at twitch.tv/ZachSkowski, where I play all of these games with my viewers, go over all these concepts, just do all sorts of chess content. In our next endgame video, that will be here, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.